I thought it might be you. Then I'm afraid, Horace... No. This only bolsters my resolve. Please, lend me your strength. Help me vanquish Aldrich, the man-eating fiend.
Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Mont, and in this video we'll be talking Dark Souls lore. Specifically, we'll be talking about a pair of characters who the player will encounter several times on their journey throughout Lothric and the lands converged. In the series so far, we've had many characters whose journeys reflect aspects of our own. Solaire of Astora, searching for his son. Siegmeyer of Catarina, ostensibly seeking no more than adventure itself. Luctiel of Mira, fighting to stave off the effects of the deep curse as she tracks down her brother. And the same rings true for the characters we'll be discussing today, for their journey mirrors ours and their fate inexorably tied with our own. It is of course Anri of Astora and their travelling companion, Horace the Hushed. As usual, we'll start with a look at their names, and let's kick things off with Horace. Derived from the Roman Horatius, pardon my pronunciation, his name seems to mean timekeeper. There is a famous poet by the name, but I do not think there's any real relevance with Horace's own character in Dark Souls. His moniker of the Hushed comes from the fact that he isn't very talkative, and we'll delve more into that soon. But how about Anri? As you are no doubt aware, Anri is unique amongst Dark Souls characters in that they change depending on the player character. If you create a female character, Anri will be male, and if you play as a male, Anri will be female. This obviously means they need somewhat of a unisex name, such as Alex, and as it happens, Anri is quite an interesting name. As a European masculine name, Anri has connections with Henry, Henrik, Heinrich, and the like. Although we did have a Henrik in Bloodborne, there is no relation here, I imagine. And whilst the name would seem to imply something along the lines of a ruler or leader, I think we're better off looking at the Japanese version of Anri, which is a unisex name, and probably the more relevant one here. I don't speak or read Japanese, but the symbols used can drastically affect the meaning of a name. Bizarrely enough, sticking Anri's name, as spelt in Japanese, into a translator comes up with Henry. But despite spending a considerable amount of time looking it up, I ultimately couldn't find anything too interesting behind the meaning of the name. So let's move on. What do we know about Anri and Horace other than their names? Well, we know even from our first encounter with them that they seek Saint Aldrich.
We seek the Cathedral, home of the grim Aldrich.
And although Anri and Horace successfully made their way through the Cathedral of the Deep, they discover, much like the player, that Aldrich has returned to his true home, the Boreal Valley. Although Anri did not know where Irithyll was, they were told by a pilgrim, and it's important to remember this pilgrim. But next, we will encounter unkindled Anri in the catacombs of Carthus, where they have become separated from Horace. How this happened perhaps isn't too important. We know that Anri claims to have been snared in a trap, and considering the place is full of them, that seems a safe assumption. Shortly after, we will find Anri again, deeper in the catacombs, resting near the High Lord's chamber. And bizarrely enough, although Anri still wonders on the whereabouts of Horace, you can actually see Horace from this position, far below in the smouldering lake. I'm not sure if this is an intentional jab at Anri's competence or not. Naturally, a helmet does impede your vision. Would Anri be able to see Horace without the helm? Is there some reason to keep it on? Well, if you are able to see beneath their helms, you'll find that both Anri and Horace are completely hollowed in appearance. So it could be that keeping the helm on serves to mask their appearance from others. And on that note, as fellow unkindled, we do not hollow unless we accept a certain gift from Yol of Londor. Does that mean Anri and Horace have accepted this gift? Horace also appears to be a member of the Blue Sentinels, as he will hand out the Covenant to you when you approach him. That might also explain his silence. Rosario's fingers in Dark Souls 3 take tongues as trophies from those they defeat, and the fingers are naturally opposed to the Blue Sentinels and Dark Moonblades. Did they take the tongue of Horace, leading him to join the Blue Sentinels? Or did they take his tongue and target him specifically because he was a member of the Blue Sentinels? From this point, however, Horace's role in things come to an end, unfortunately. The Silent Knight has hollowed in the smouldering lake and will be hostile. Perhaps he got trapped and driven demented, attempting to get past the immense ballista. At any rate, it is possible to inform Anri of Horace's location, which can lead to Anri also hollowing and being destroyed. But if all goes well, then we next meet Anri deep in Irithyll, where they remark on the Ashen One's bravery.
Ah, you are brave indeed, to face your duty alone. I would do well to learn from you.
In the corner of this room, the Ashen One may, or may not, find a pilgrim, disguised using the chameleon spell. Is this the same pilgrim that Anri mentioned earlier? I believe so, but now we need to consider another character, Anri of Londor.
Knowest thou of a youth named Anri? She is hollow, and will join thee in Wedlock. A fellow of mine guides her at this moment. When the time is ripe, thou mayst make thy salutations.
Anri's idea of marriage isn't quite what you might imagine, however, but the fact that she mentions a fellow of hers that is guiding Anri, my initial reaction to that was Horace, surely, because he is the one accompanying Anri. Was he secretly working with Anri all along? It could be the case, but after more consideration on the matter, and upon hearing Anri's remark concerning the pilgrim in a subsequent playthrough, I think it is more likely that the fellow guiding Anri is in fact the pilgrim. Indeed, maybe it was the pilgrim who ensured Anri and Horace were separated, because Horace is steadfast in his protection of his friend, and would surely get in the way of Anri's plans, no? Likewise, if the pilgrim is left alone, they will kidnap Anri and abscond to the Darkmoon Tomb in preparation for Anri's wedding. Even if the player ignores Anri entirely, Anri will be found in the tomb if you don't deal with the pilgrim, with someone else having fulfilled the vow. Just who could have done this? We really have no leads there. But the only remote possible candidate I could think of would be Orbeck of Vinheim, who Anri claims is calling himself the Lord of Hollows. But who knows if this is supposition on her part, or indeed an outright lie, because Orbeck never says anything of the sorts to us. Now, if the player weds Anri, they use the Sword of Avowal to somehow drain Anri of their accumulated dark sigil, which again might imply that Anri had indeed had dealings with Jarl of Londor, and the Ashen One adds this dark sigil to their own, and this seems to grant the power to usurp the fire, and once the Ashen One has done this, Anri can be seen in the Usurp the Fire ending, potentially naked, if the Ashen One was rude enough to take Anri's elite knight armor. But if this fate is averted, Anri will instead make their way to their original target, Aldrich. Here, Anri can summon the Ashen One to aid in the defeat of the Man-Eater. And this marks the end of Anri's quest. They can be found hollow, either near Horace or near the Cathedral of the Deep, presumably giving in to the curse, having achieved vengeance in killing Aldrich. But then, why would Anri and Horace seek vengeance on Aldrich? For that, we have to enter the realm of what is mostly speculation, starting with this, the description of Horace's armour. Steel helm of Horace the Hushed, who took a liking to its cold, bulky insides. The original owner was said to be a corrupt executioner who was killed and stripped of his armour. Horace is one of only 2 children to escape Aldrich's clutches. Before we get onto the more interesting point, let's consider the fact that it belonged to a corrupt executioner. We also find an executioner's sword outside of the Cathedral of the Deep, so there could be a connection there, considering the relation between Aldrich, the Cathedral, and Horace and Anri. At any rate, the last line is the most interesting one, of course. Horace is one of only 2 children to escape Aldrich's clutches. It would make a lot of sense if Anri were the other.
I never managed to find Horace, but my duty must be done, even alone, as an unkindled Lord Seeker. For the children I knew, bless their souls.
And
Oh, Horace, why? Don't leave me. Not you. Not like the others. Oh, Horace. Horace.
So, Anri and Horace were children destined to be eaten by Aldrich, but the two of them somehow escaped and made it their mission to kill Aldrich? But how does this fit into the timeline? Anri claims to be unkindled, and we can assume that Aldrich was reawakened by the bell not too long ago. Does this mean that Aldrich planned to consume Anri in a past lifetime, so to speak, and Anri and Horace just happened to be raised as well? Then again, what other unkindled do we know of? Well, there's Hawkwood, and Hawkwood has a relation to another Lord of Cinder, the Abyss Watchers. So, Anri and Horace, were they revived by the bell because they had some strong emotional connection to Aldrich, even if that connection was a negative one? Then there's Siegward, another unkindled with a strong connection to a Lord of Cinder, Yorm. Maybe that's something to think about in the future. Or was Aldrich revived by the bell and then planned to eat Anri? But that would imply at least 10-20 years have passed, surely. And then we have to also consider that Anri didn't know Aldrich had left the cathedral. As far as Anri was concerned, Aldrich was at the cathedral. Even with time being convoluted, this is a confusing matter. Fortunately, it's not one I think is all that important in the grand scheme of things. What I find more interesting is Anri's connection with Astora. If she and Horace were carted along the road of sacrifices as children to the Cathedral of the Deep, does that imply they were originally from the undead settlement? Could they have a connection with Greyrat? Greyrat himself, after all, has unused dialogue in reference to Anri saving them, much like Siegward can save them.
I might have died if it wasn't for that little knight Anri, but in the end it all paid off.
We know that Astora is a ruined land by the time of Dark Souls 3, but did Anri actually hail from there, or not? That's a hard question to answer. On the one hand, Anri has a lot of Astoran treasures, but then when we read that equipment we learn the following. The mere mention of Astora invoked wistful pangs, and perhaps it was such a dream that drew Anri to this faraway home, known only by name. That implies to me that Anri has never actually been to Astora, but was perhaps told of it by their parents. It is entirely possible that Anri is a descendant of an Astoran noble, and takes some pride in this. The heirlooms being passed down. But again, it's very hard to know for certain. Something else that is also interesting to consider, Anri's blade is almost identical to the Astora straight-sword, save for being more silver as opposed to gold. And the blade supposedly belonged to an earnest, noble figure. And then we have the Ring of the Evil Eye, again in her possession. This ring captured the foul spirit of an evil eye, a creature that ravaged Astora. The horrid spirit nearly destroyed Astora, but was eventually defeated by the sword of one most noble. People thought this might have been Solaire of Astora, but considering that it mentions the sword of one most noble, and Anri's sword mentions that it also belonged to one most noble, what do you think? Is it too much of a stretch to think that Anri's sword belonged to the one who destroyed the evil eye creature? It could be grasping in the dark, but the use of language is very deliberate from my perspective, so as to imply a connection. And here's where I'm going into full crazy speculation mode. What if Anri is a descendant of Oscar? And what if Oscar was the one who defeated the evil eye? There isn't really much to support this theory other than the fact that Oscar uses the Astora straight-sword, which isn't Anri's blade, but is almost identical to it. The original description of the Astora straight-sword, which is not looted from Oscar's body, reads that it belonged to an unknown knight. And well, Anri and Oscar both wore the same armour, although whether originally or not it belonged to Oscar is likewise a confusing issue. Armour of a nameless knight, perhaps an elite knight of Astora, based on the fire-warding heraldic symbol of its blue surcoat. Although he was loath to give up on his undead mission, he perished at the undead asylum and went hollow. Although this seems to heavily imply that it is in fact Oscar's actual armour, we do not find it on his body, but instead on a random body in the Darkroot Basin. Either way, there isn't really too much evidence to support or discredit the theory, but sometimes that is the point of Dark Souls. Things are left intentionally vague, with blank spots marking where the player should fill them in for themselves. Is Oscar, Knight of the Undead Asylum, who sprung the chosen undead from jail, the ancestor of Anri, the knight who could be wed to the Ashen One? Probably not, but personally, I think there is a certain poetic grace to that, both Astora knights being intrinsically linked to the first chosen undead and the last unkindled ash. But that is just my opinion. What do you think of Anri and Horace? Please do let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and take care.
Yes! We did it! I owe this to you. Thank you, truly. Horace, we've done it. We really have.